Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the European Parliament Intergroup on Climate Change, Biodiversity and Sustainable Development, I'm very happy to welcome you all to today's event, where we'll be addressing plastics pollution and specifically the question on whether biodegradable plastics can be part of the solution. Before we kick off today's event, I would like to take the opportunity to thank hosting MEP Mr. Mohammed Chahim, co-chair of the Circular Economy Working Group under the umbrella of the European Parliament Intergroup, for taking the lead with regards to this event. I would also like to thank co-organizers from SAPEA, the Science Advice for Policy by European Academies. SAPEA is part of the European Commission Scientific Advice Mechanism, SAM, and together with a group of chief scientific advisors, they provide independent scientific advice to European commissioners in order to support their decision making. So on this note, I'm very happy to let you know that today's webinar will be moderated by Professor Ole Petersen, Vice President of Academia Europa, from whom you'll be hearing very shortly. So prior to passing the floor to Mr. Chahim for his opening remarks to the event, I would like to invite our audience to send us your questions during the event using the Q&A box at the right of your screen. In doing so, please make sure to also choose the All Panelists option, and please note the speaker to whom your question is best addressed, so that on behalf of the Secretariat of the Intergroup, we can facilitate a fruitful discussion to follow. So without further ado, thank you all for joining us today, honorable members of the European Parliament, dear speakers. Mr. Chahim, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ilias. Thanks everyone for joining this interesting debate or discussion about the future of plastics and to what extent biodegradable plastics will be part of it. I'm very excited about this topic because I do believe that we need to address plastic pollution and we need to see what type of solutions can be part of the sustainable transition. So thanks everyone for joining. I mean, plastic is a big issue. I mean, it takes more than 400 years to degrade. So most of it still exists in some form, and maybe, at least we have to understand, and maybe we'll be a bit wiser after this session, to what extent biodegradable plastics can contribute in reducing the accumulation of plastics in the environment. We still have, for the majority of applications, including most single-use packaging and plastics bag, of course, the first step we need to do is to try to reduce the plastic use and promote reuse and recycling. But I do believe that biodegradable plastics certainly can play a role in reducing the accumulation of plastics in the environment. But we have to be careful because the use of biodegradable plastics can be misleading. Because the rate at which plastics, biodegradable plastics can be biodegraded really depends on the material use and depends on the conditions in the environment where it ends up. And we really need to understand more careful what the conditions are and how the use of this biodegradable plastics are fit in our transition towards a CO2 neutral society. But also in order to have less pollution and less environmental damage due to the use of plastics. So I'm very curious what the results of the SAPEA study are and what the recommendations will be and how we as members of the Parliament can use that in our strategy transition to use less plastics, to have less pollution, and at the end of the day to have a better environment. I think this is sufficient for the introduction. I would want to give the floor to Professor Ole Petersen, the Vice President of Academia Europea. Unfortunately, myself, I cannot be part of the whole debate, but I will be replaced by my assistant Bauke Brouwer, who will join later on. Will have the closing remarks. And of course, I will try to follow as much as possible the results of this outcome and see whether I can look at the video, the recording. But I'm very happy that two of my colleagues, Delara Burkhardt and Stephanie Bijou, are here. And let's see what we together can do to tackle this very important topic. So, Professor Ole Petersen, for you the floor. I wish you all a very fruitful debate. and let's see at the end what the next step should be, and how we together, society, science, and politics, can work together to solve this issue. Thank you very much. Professor Peterson, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chahim, for this nice introduction. It's also my pleasure, on behalf of SAPEA, Science Advice for Policy by European Academies, to welcome you all to this webinar on plastics. Can we have the slides, please, Regine? So the theme is plastics pollution, as already mentioned. And of course, what we are going to debate today is whether biodegradable plastics actually is a solution. Before coming on to the theme, next slide, please. I just want to say a few words about SAPEA, because maybe many of you will not know about this. So it's part of the European Commission's scientific advice mechanism. And SAPEA stands, as I already mentioned, for Science Advice for Policy by European Academies. And the SAPEA consortium is made up of 5 pan-European networks, and you see their 5 logos here on the screen. So it's Academia Europaea, which I happen to represent, is ALEA, All European Academies. There is FEAM, Federation of European Academies of Medicine. There is ESAC, European Academy Science Advisory Council, and there's Eurocase, the organization of Federation of European Engineering Academies. And what SAPEA does is to produce evidence review reports for the European Commission in topics for which advice is needed. And I have just on this screen shown a few front pages of the evidence review reports we have produced, including, as you can see, the biodegradability of plastics. Next slide, please. So the way the scientific advice mechanism operates in sort of very broad brush strokes, and Nicole Grobert, the chair of the group of chief scientific advisors, will probably say more about that. But just here, as an example for biodegradability of plastics, SAPEA produced a very substantial evidence review report with a very, very large reference base. And that is then the basis for the scientific opinion, which you see the front page of to the right of the screen. So usually we manage to produce the evidence review report and the scientific opinion at the same time. They're both in the public domain, a very important aspect of the scientific advice mechanism. And these 2 reports then gives the College of European Commissioners the possibility of making evidence-based policy. And of course, it's up to them to do with the reports as they see fit. Now, next slide, please. To the theme of today. This is actually the first figure from the evidence review report that SAPEA published at the end of 2020. And it illustrates in many ways certainly a major part of the plastics problem. So the lower curve shows the production of plastics in Europe, and the upper one is the worldwide plastics production. So as you see, if we go back to 1950, I am so old that I actually remember 1950, I was 7 years old at the time, there was essentially no plastics around. Absolutely, basically none. But in the years after that, there is a dramatic increase in the production and use of plastics. Now, some people looking very superficially at this graph might take comfort from the fact that the European curve, so to speak, is flat. However, you will quickly realize that there is no comfort in that, because as Mohammed Chahim has already told us, it stays there. So it's cumulative. So while it's flat, the vast majority of the plastics production is not biodegradable at the moment. It's only a tiny proportion of plastics production that is biodegradable. So it stays there. Worldwide, the problem is even worse, of course, and a lot of the plastics production is in China. So there are very, very good reasons to consider what should be done. And our expert panel, we are very lucky today to have two of our most active members of the working group here, and they will give us the details of the evidence and be able to answer questions in the Q&A session. Next slide, please. We have a very eminent panel with us today. Shortly, Patrick Child, who is the Deputy Director General of the Director General for Research and Innovation, will be speaking. We have Kęstutis Sadauskas with us, who is the Director of Circular Economy on Green Growth of the Director General for Environment. And as I already mentioned, we have the chair of the group of Chief Scientific Advisors, Nicole Grobert, with us. In red, I've highlighted our two experts today, Dr. Miriam Weber, and who is the Managing Director of Hydra Marine Sciences, and who was a member, as I said already, of the Science Advice for Policy Working Expert Group. And we have Michael Sander from the ETH in Zurich, who also was a prominent member of the working group, and they contributed hugely to this very substantial report. After that, we will hear from Jacques Nuni, who is the Director of Sustainable Development at SAPEA Group, and thereafter from Iona Popescu, Senior Program Manager in the Circular Economy team at the European Environmental Citizens Organizations for Standardization. We then have comments, as Mohammed Chahim already said, by two MEPs, Delara Burkhardt and Stefan Bichou. And thereafter, Ilias Krampas will take over and lead the Q&A session. So my 10 minutes are up, and it's my great pleasure now to call on the Deputy Director General of the Director General for Research and Innovation, Mr. Patrick Child, to give his observations. Please, Mr. Child.
Thank you, Professor Peterson, and I'm very happy to be here for this important event. I'd like to pay tribute in particular to the support that we received from Mohammed Chahim and from the Parliamentary Intergroup on Climate Change, Biodiversity and Sustainable Development, but also my very warm appreciation for the excellent work that we've received from the SAPEA consortium in the input that you have provided for this extremely relevant topic. I'd like to set the scene of our discussion today by making, I think, three general points. I mean, firstly, to highlight the importance that the European Commission attaches to research and innovation as providing a necessary scientific base for our work on the European Green Deal. Secondly, I'd like to touch a little bit more on some of the work that the scientific advice mechanisms more specifically has contributed to our reflections on a number of key themes on the European Green Deal. And then I'd like to conclude with a few remarks about how we make use of the advice and input that we get from the scientific advice mechanism in framing our important policy initiatives in this area. So my first point on the vital role of research and innovation in supporting our work on the European Green Deal. I mean, as you all know, the Commission under President von der Leyen has set the very ambitious goal of becoming, making Europe the first climate neutral continent by 2050. And I think we all recognize that this requires rapid progress on innovative technologies and also developing policies that are informed by the best possible available science. I think that the use of scientific expertise to inform policymaking is a core principle of the work that we've been doing at a European level, deeply rooted in our core values and the foundations of enlightenment, which have inspired the creation of our liberal democracies in Europe. And we in DG Research and Innovation believe that we can play a very important role in funding and supporting research and innovation activities across the European Union, in our associated countries and beyond, in order to address some of the major societal challenges that we're facing. And at the moment, I mean, particularly as we seek to develop the sort of green and digital recovery post-COVID, we think that this is even more important in support of the work that we're doing on the Green Deal in particular. And it was for this reason that in 2016, the European Commission established the scientific advice mechanism to support our policy-making activities and to ensure that when our commissioners are taking decisions, they are doing that on the basis of high quality, timely and independent scientific advice. And so the mechanism as a whole is composed, as you've presented, Professor Peterson, with the group of chief scientific advisors, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing from our distinguished chair, Professor Nicole Grobert, later this morning, but also with the vital inputs that we received from the SAPEA consortium, which is able to tap into the best scientific opinions and advice from across the European Union's academy communities. And this is a project which is, of course, funded under our Research and Innovation Framework Programme, Horizon 2020. I mean, my second point is, of course, that to highlight some of the important contributions that the scientific advice mechanism has provided to our recent work on the European Green Deal. Of course, today we're addressing the very important question of microplastics, and I'm looking forward very much to the discussion on the biodegradability of plastics that we're going to have later on. But we've had some past initiatives which are of I think, equivalent importance. I mean, there was already in June 2020 an opinion on the adaptation to health effects of climate change in Europe. We've had work specifically on food systems and sustainable production of food from oceans in 2017 and 2020. We've had some previous work on microplastics in April 2019 around the environmental and health risks of microplastics, which I think build into the work here on biodegradability. And we've looked also separately at novel carbon capture and utilization technologies in May of 2018. And I think what's important in addressing the work that we're doing is that it's not just a sort of self-generated, spontaneous initiative by the scientific advice mechanism to decide to look at a particular topic, but that they are working in response to a mandate and a request from specific commissioners or groups of commissioners who are particularly in need of scientific wisdom to support their policy work. And in this specific case on biodegradability of plastics in the open environment, this is something which is specifically requested by our colleagues in DG Environment, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing from my colleague Kestutis Sadaukas a little bit later on about how this fits into the broader work that they are doing on this important theme. And just finally, on the work of the scientific advice mechanism, I'm also saying that we're very much looking forward to their forthcoming opinion on energy transitions in Europe, which is also very much a part of our European Green Deal agenda, which will be published, I hope, later this month. So my third point is, well, what do we do? How do we use the scientific advice that we receive to inform our policies on research and innovation and more broadly? As I've said, the scientific advice mechanism is working on the basis of specific requests from the College of Commissioners or from individual commissioners and their services, and feeds into policies not just in DG Research and Innovation, but across the whole of the Commission. And so the advice that we're looking at today on biodegradability of plastic was requested by the former Commissioner, Carmenu Vella, and we hope will provide really timely and relevant advice for the forthcoming revision of the European policy framework on plastics. And I think that by ensuring that colleagues in DG Research and Innovation and DG Environment work together, that we're able to focus the output of the scientific advice on what is most topical, timely and relevant for the policy discussions that are ongoing. I should also add, finally, that we hope also that the recommendations from this opinion and from other work by the scientific advice mechanism will feed into our broader agenda on Horizon Europe, our new 95 billion euro program for research and innovation for the coming years. And in particular, one of the headline missions that we have under this new program on healthy oceans and the missions both on healthy oceans and on soil health, which are two key priorities under Horizon Europe, where scientific advice will be very valuable. So that's what I wanted to say in terms of setting the scene. I've tried to put the work of the scientific advice mechanism in its broader context, confident that other colleagues who are much more expert than me on the substance will be able to take the discussion forward, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing what this session will deliver. So thank you very much, Professor Peters.
Thank you Mr. Chahim, for this very welcome, very broad view of this whole problem complex, which I think is extremely valuable. And we understand that you have a very busy day. You may not be able to stay with us for the whole of the meeting, but thank you very much for giving your time to being present here today. We really appreciate that very much. And we now move on to the intervention from Mr. Kęstutis Sadauskas, Director of the Circular Economy and Green Growth from the Directorate General Environment. So please, Mr. Sadauskas, please take the floor and give us your remarks.
Yes, hello everybody, and thank you for the event. And I would like to then pick up from where Patrick Child left, or in fact even from what he said in the beginning, is to stress the importance of the scientific underpinning of our policies. Because in many of the questions, many of the issues that we face for the policy choice, we hear different opinions, different positions, different facts and figures, and sometimes you don't know which one is true, which one is not. And for that, you really need to rely on the best science that there is available in order for us to make the best shot in the policy choice. And that's precisely where SAPEA advice comes into. Extremely valuable. Not only that it comes from the research community, but it's also, let's say, sufficiently independent. So it gives us also some critical thoughts about even some preconceived notions that we may have had ourselves, and that will really guide us in this direction. Now, since the plastic strategy in 2018, we have been seeking to move plastics from an unsustainable model to a sustainable one. And while biodegradable plastics could be part of the solution, they also present certain challenges. Those who say biodegradation, they also say, and they also mean material property, and they also mean receiving environment, meaning where the plastic ends up. This is the first conclusion we share with the chief scientific advisors and SAPEA experts. This is also the first challenge for these plastics. Biodegradable means biodegradable in certain environment or under certain conditions, for example, temperature or in water, or within certain time scale, 6 months, 3 months, more, less. So the first question here is, does biodegradation or biodegradable plastics occur actually or as expected? Even before that, why should we even favor biodegradation? Basically, it is degradation as the end-of-life option over other alternatives, such as recovery and turning it back into the economy. Researchers tell us that when reduce, reuse, and recycling are not feasible options, and specific conditions are met, biodegradable plastics can be of benefit. Possible benefits are less cross-contamination of waste streams, higher quantity and quality of recycled material. It can also be lead to less food and plastic ending up with residual waste. And also where collection from the open environment is not feasible, less persistent macro and microplastic pollution in an open environment can also be assured here. Because biodegradable plastics are not a solution to inappropriate waste management or littering, we have to think carefully of where collection is not possible or hardly possible in practice. Academia, independent institutes, and industry have come to some conclusions. SAPEA experts mention agricultural mulch films, fireworks, and components of fishing gear, dolly ropes, all typically made of conventional polymers, all challenging to collect. Plus fruit and vegetable stickers, where the separation of the plastic from the bio-waste is challenging, and bio-waste DAX to increase collection of bio-waste. Independent institutes and industry identify 8 agricultural and forestry applications, 11 household and garden applications, 2 fishery applications. So we seem to be moving in the good and right direction. This said, social science experts tell us, and I'm extremely grateful for the chief scientific advisors and SAPEA experts for gathering such a large and multidisciplinary team. So social scientists are saying that we have to keep it simple. We may believe in Homo sapiens as really sapiens, but sometimes there is a limit to the intelligence here. On one hand, we need clarity, meaning clear and accurate information. To date, too ambiguous terminology, too many unsubstantiated claims. On the other hand, because of limited human cognitive capacity, unfortunately we have to admit it, we need to keep it simple. Benefits of biodegradable plastics will not be achieved without a consumer. For products that look similar or identical, clear labeling is necessary, but not sufficient to move to a circular plastics economy successfully. Market-based and regulatory measures may be needed as well. And of course, what about simplified design? What about new business models? Over the next months, we will continue to consult and gather input on the best possible policy framework for bio-based, biodegradable and compostable plastics. And of course, Commission counts on your contribution to deliver a successful policy framework next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for these very valuable remarks. And you are absolutely right. There is a very important social science aspect, which of course the evidence review report that we produced drew very much attention to. It is a multidisciplinary approach that can solve this very important problem. Today we are focusing a little bit more on the scientific side, but we have actually held very recently also an event where we focused entirely on the social science aspect of it. So we are very much aware that all these aspects have to be integrated into a final plan of action. So thank you very much indeed. And we now move on to the next item on the agenda, and this is the presentation by Professor Nicole Grobert, the Chief Scientific Advisor, the Chair of the Group of Chief Scientific Advisors to the European Commission. Nicole is a member of Academia Europaea and is Professor of Nanomaterials at the Department of Materials at the University of Oxford. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to Nicole. Please make your presentation.
Your kind words. A lot of it has been said in a different style as to what I'm going to present. So here I am today to give you a little bit of an insight on how we work as the Group of Chief Scientific Advisors within the construct of SAM. SAM, in my personal opinion, is a very special construct in the sense that we're 7 advisors forming the group, but we closely collaborate with SAPEA. At the same time, it's independent because SAPEA collects independent independent evidence, scientific evidence on which we're formulating our recommendations. This work couldn't be happening without the support of the Secretariat at the Commission. So it's the 3, the triumvirate, as I call it, is the 3 that really are working together, and with the aim of producing scientific advice for well-informed policy and better regulation. That's the ultimate goal. The process has to be transparent and as free as possible from bias. And of course, it shouldn't duplicate what has already been around, but complement other scientific advice bodies in and beyond European Union institutions. Don't be afraid of this slide here. Ole already indicated a little bit how we work. So we have a societal challenge. In this case, we're talking about plastics or energy consumption in the future. And if we get a request from the Commission, we start designing a scoping paper which defines the scoping question and defines the work that we're going to focus on. And this group, the Group of Chief Scientific Advisors, then engages with SAPEA, who is in charge of basically selecting the experts in the field, because Although we're 7 with a strong scientific backgrounds in different areas, not only the hard sciences, but also the social sciences, we can't cover all the subjects, nor have we got expertise in all the topics. That's why this mechanism very strongly builds on the excellence of the academies that we have in Europe. Now, the group can work with SAPEA. In some cases, we also have gathered evidence from other sources. So you see that little blue arrow here. Now, SAPEA produces this evidence review report, which is produced in parallel with the scientific opinion. We together develop the concept and develop the scientific advice. We invite experts to scrutinize the work. And the advisors, more importantly, towards the end, just at the end, once the opinion is close to its final draft, invites also stakeholders to comment on the recommendations to see if there are any feasible before we publish the opinion, which then informs the Commission and provides proposals for policy and legislation. So ultimately, we hope that we can help make Europe a better place to help you make better policies. Who are we as a group? So the principles of scientific integrity and transparency is paramount for the work of the group of chief science advisors. The members are selected with the help of an identification committee that's composed of independent experts. We're contractually bound to be impartial, so it's just us as a person, but not the institution that we represent. And we serve on the board or in the group for about 5 years. If there is any conflict of interest, the members must inform the chair, and the group selects the chair amongst themselves and also produces their own agenda and adopts their own rules and procedures. So that's the theory. Here are the faces, and you see new faces as of May 2021. This is the group, the composition of the group. And you can see a broad spectrum of backgrounds ranging from biorobotics, geography, biochemistry, history, energy, economics, chemistry myself, biology. It covers a broad range, but it doesn't cover everything. Now, before us, the group had different advisors. As I say, every 5 years it changes. And the previous group and group members have produced a number of recommendations that you can see listed here in a chronological order, including cybersecurity or a scientific opinion on how to give scientific advice, best practices. And over the years, it's not just the chronological sequence that you can see here, but the opinions themselves over time also feed into each other. And the nice example is the biodegradable of plastics, which originally basically was triggered by preparing a scientific opinion on food from the oceans. So research or the scientific evidence gathering showed that there is actually a lot of plastic in the oceans, which triggered this bottom-up initiative of the advisors to produce a microplastic pollution opinion, which in turn triggered the invitation or the mandate for the current scientific opinion that we're discussing today, namely the biodegradability of plastics. And we were specifically asked to look at the following, and we defined the scoping question, such as from a scientific point of view and an end-of-life perspective, and applying to plastics that biodegrade either in the terrestrial, riverine, or marine environments. Considering the waste hierarchy and circular economy approach, the question was, what are the criteria and corresponding applications of such plastics that are beneficial to the environment compared with non-biodegradable plastics? And based on the ERR and evidence that we have seen, the advisors came up with 3 key recommendations, and in part you've heard them already mentioned earlier. But the most important start is to adopt a definition of biodegradability, and that has to be a systems property which takes into account materials properties and specific environmental conditions. To translate that, what that means if you have your lunchbox sitting on the kitchen counter for a day or two, it's unlikely that you will be looking forward to be eating this after 2 days sitting on the kitchen counter. If you keep it in your fridge, it's very well possible to still eat your lunch. Or if you put it in the freezer, that's a different environment again. The food is not biodegrading and you happily can defrost it and eat it a month later. So that is the starting point. And apart from that, the key is to follow the waste hierarchy, reduce, reuse, recycle. We need to identify what the materials are, testing, certification, and of course, put the labels on to know what it is all about. So more specifically, the recommendation one is to limit the use of biodegradable plastics in the open environment to specific applications for which reduction, reuse, and recycling are not. So prioritize reuse and recycle of plastics before consider biodegradation. So it's not the solution to everything. So you have to first reduce the use, and limit the use of biodegradable plastics in the open environment to specific applications where collection from the open environment is not feasible. And there are quite a few of those. We heard dolly ropes earlier. So do not consider as a solution for inappropriate waste management or littering, so that biodegradable coffee cup is not necessarily a solution. In recommendation 2, we strongly support the development of coherent testing certification standards for biodegradation of plastics in the open environment. That is important in order to assess the materials and support development of testing and certification schemes evaluating actual biodegradation of biodegradable plastics in the context of their application, because plastics may behave differently depending on what application they are used for and which in receiving an open environment they are applied. And require the testing of biodegradation of biodegradable plastics applications under laboratory and simulated environmental conditions. So that's one stage, but also require the assessment of biodegradation and environmental risk of biodegradable plastics under the conditions of specific open environments. So these are 2 scenarios. And finally, support the development of materials, a catalog and their relative biodegradation rates in a range of environments as a reference material where people can go and have a look to see what they need to do. And finally, recommendation 3 covers the aspect of human beings. The people, in my own personal words, I would say in this whole scenario of plastics, people are the weakest link, because it's the people who use the material and the people who litter it or who abuse it. So there we are. Promote supply of accurate information on the properties, appropriate use and disposal, and limitations of biodegradable plastics to relevant user groups. What does that mean? So initiate and support information campaigns to address current misconceptions and confusions. We heard about this also earlier, related to bio-based, compostable, and biodegradable plastics. Often you find a plastic bag, it says biodegradable, so you wonder, can I use it in my compost heap, or do I need to put it away elsewhere? And the next thing to do is support the development of a clear, effective, and standardized European labeling system which informs end users and consumers to ensure proper use and disposal of biodegradable plastic applications in the open environment. And finally, also the manufacturers need to know how to handle biodegradable plastics, and the vendors to ensure accurate information transfer along the value chain. So from production to end user, really the information must be accurate and clear and transparent. Thank you very much. Sorry, I was a bit longer.
This comprehensive presentation, which I think is very helpful and puts everything into a very good frame. We're actually not in trouble with time, because the introductory remarks were all quite a bit shorter than indicated in timetable. So our experts, Miriam Weber and Michael Sander, do not need to worry. You can even take a few more minutes if you want than what is timetabled. So we are now coming to the experts who actually know about plastic and their breakdown. We have presentations from Miriam Weber, who is the Managing Director, as I said, of Hydra Marine Sciences. She is a marine biologist with a specialty in marine microbiology, and Miriam's research actually focuses on biodegradation of plastics in the marine environment. And we have also Michael Sander with us from the in Zurich. Both he and Miriam were members of the SAPEA expert working group. And Michael runs his own independent research group in the areas of environmental biomacromolecular chemistry and environmental chemistry of micropollutants. I understand that Michael will start, and then Miriam will take over. So please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Ole. Can you hear me well?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay, perfect. So thanks a lot for the invitation, and thanks a lot for having the opportunity together with Miriam, who will speak second, to present some information from the evidence-based report on biodegradability of plastics in the open environment. I would like to start, maybe Miriam, next slide, please. Yeah, I would like to start by acknowledging that, of course, Miriam and we are presenting, but of course there are a lot more people involved in this work. The evidence-based report is, I think it is over 200 pages, over 230 pages, and it's clear we cannot summarize all of what we have written and discussed and elaborated on in this relatively brief presentation. It was already stressed that it's an interdisciplinary group, and this is truly the case. Maybe what makes Miriam and I unique in the group, and others have other competencies, but just to place ourselves, we actually work on we do research and we do testing on biodegradable plastics. For Miriam, this is in marine and freshwater environments, and for me, this is mainly in soils, or me and my working group. Next slide, please. So what I would like to do is, or what we would like to do is in the following is give maybe three parts. First is we would like to address the question that was raised head on, and we would like to specify when can there be a solution and when maybe are there not a solution, biodegradable plastics. The second one is we will briefly define biodegradable plastics because a lot depends on this definition, and then we will try to highlight some steps forward. This would be in the second part by Miriam. So maybe to start with the first, plastic pollution, are biodegradable plastics a solution? And it was very clear in the working group that they're not a solution for littering. And this is important to acknowledge because littering is what we have in mind, and mismanaged waste and conventional plastics when we speak about plastics in the environment. But we feel strongly that there are already mechanisms in place. The waste hierarchy was already addressed, meaning reduce, reuse, recycle whenever possible. These should have priorities. So we cannot expect biodegradable plastics to address the global plastic pollution problem. That is not the case. Next slide, please. However, and this is important, and this is where we feel there can be a contribution, there are selected specific applications in which the use of biodegradable plastics makes sense. What we didn't do in the report is we didn't try to come up with the most complete list of which applications these are, because we feel this is up to an expert group to decide. It's a separate discussion. But we believe that we identified some criteria based on which we can identify where biodegradability and biodegradable plastics could have a contribution to solving the plastic pollution problem. One of these application areas is where we have intentional release to the open environment and where recovery of plastic is not foreseen or even impossible. So geotextiles would be one example for this. Miriam, next slide, please. There are also a second category, and we are not claiming that we have all categories, but these are broader ideas, broader concept categories in which we apply these. The second one is a high potential of loss to the environment, and recovery is often impossible or not feasible. An example for that could be plastic beads that are used during transport of concrete slabs. And these are typically, you have the chance to remove them from the concrete slabs when they're being put out, but there's a high likelihood, high potential of these materials ending up in the environment. Next slide, please. The next one is, there are certain applications where there is an unavoidable release into the environment and where recovery is strictly impossible. And this is yet another category where we think biodegradable plastics can contribute to solving the plastic pollution problem. An example here, but this is only one example, are shoe soles, for instance. Next slide, please. We would like to point the attention also to a project that was run by the Nova Institute called Biosyn, and the subtitle was Products for Which Biodegradation Makes Sense. We had this in mind, and we referenced this project when we designed our report. So again, what I just talked about is, please understand it more as broader categories, and the specific applications are then need to be evaluated by experts on the topic, whether biodegradation in specific applications can make sense. But broader categories in which it makes sense, we already identified. Next slide, please. So before I hand over to Miriam, one central part of what we worked on in the report is that we tried to give a concise definition of biodegradation. And without going into too much detail, what is important is that biodegradation is a multi-step process. We identified two processes, and the end products, and this is important, are CO2 under oxy conditions and methane, CO2 and methane under anoxic conditions. And it's very important in laboratory incubations, but also in studies that complement that. In laboratory incubations, it's very important to follow breakdown of these materials into CO2 and into methane. These are the final end products. And this is important to request to also avoid misuse. There are some regulatory aspects that Miriam will talk about. There is, of course, the aspect of time, and there's also the aspect of variations in the open environment. The soil is not a sediment, is not a river, is not a lake, is not an ocean. Miriam, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Miriam from Hydra, and I'd like to highlight some step forwards we identified in the SAPEA working group. And thank you all for joining this afternoon. And here we see two examples explaining very well that you have to consider time frames. A geotextile cannot biodegrade in a very fast manner because it has a long lifetime. It is expected to support the soil for a certain amount of years before it actually then could be biodegraded by microbial organisms. On the other hand, we have applications such as mulch films, where a faster biodegradation rate is needed. Otherwise, it would accumulate in the field where it is used, when in the next year or within 2 years, a next film will be applied. So this is an important aspect to consider. So we identified or suggested also to consider different time frames, maybe even identify potential categories. For example, a fast one, considering biodegradation rate within weeks, and here in an example of a cartridge cases or fireworks, where the application is very short, and so the biodegradation should happen also in a very fast manner. We have a category we could consider, or calling it medium, so it would last for months, maybe years. Here you have an example of a seed coating, which is applied in agricultural field already since many years. And here it would make sense that we have coatings which would then biodegrade within months or a year. Probably. And again, the geotextile, where we have an application lifetime, which is much longer. So we talk about years or maybe even decades. Another topic to consider and to account is the variation within and between the receiving environments and the prevalent conditions there. We chose two pictures of a city. Everyone maybe knows the picture of Singapore here, these iconic plants in front of a lake or even marine environment, compared to Toronto in winter, to highlight that we have different climate zones where, for example, the little slabs for the concrete plates are used and maybe then lost in the open environment, or shoe soles are worn and abraded on the streets of these two environments. At the same time, we also have to consider an impact to the environment in different manners. It's different, you have different organisms living in soil, sediment, rivers, lake, or oceans. And there we also should have a good frame to look at so that we have can be sure that the applied plastics are not doing any harm in the long term to the environment. So we say that it should be done in the future, developing missing standard test methods and specifications. These are two different sets to consider when we talk about standards. That's reflected in chapter 4. We are leading you through the different chapters here, 1 to 6. And here we have put together what is available at the very moment. We have quite some standard test methods for the marine system currently available, a bit fewer for soil and the least for the fresh water. And the standard specification is available for one specific application in soil at the very moment, and there for mulch film or mulch foil. So there is quite some work to do, but we have a clear the scientists have a clear idea how to move on, and also industry. Yeah, we are not doing this work alone. And here in chapter 6, we were clearly working on labeling and communication, and the current status is that we have a bit confusion or even uncertainty that was mentioned before. So which plastics do actually biodegrade in which receiving environment, and then also how fast would they biodegrade in the receiving environment, and how to communicate this clearly is addressed in one chapter on its own. In conclusion, we say to the question we are discussing today, biodegradable plastics are a solution, yes, but not the solution. So certainly not in violation with the waste hierarchy concept, which was mentioned before. And last but not least, we would like to mention here that the precautionary principle requests that biodegradation truly tested and regulated. That would be a good step forward. It requires stringent tests to ensure that products are environmentally mean and also to prevent misuse, and certainly also for the whole society, be it policy, be it end consumers, be it industry, have a good, clear framework to work with to understand and be able to communicate about the biodegradability and also the biodegradation rates of certain products. Thank you for your attention. This is our input from our side from the working group, and we are looking forward to the discussion later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both Michael and Miriam, for, I think, this exceptionally clear presentation. And thank you also for giving very concrete examples. I think that helps enormously the general understanding of this topic. So I think you have given actually an excellent example of clear communication in these two presentations, and I really commend that to everyone who will be discussing this topic also in the future. So thank you very much. We are actually still in good time, so thank you to everybody for keeping to time. And we now move on to the presentation by Jacques Nuni, who is Director of Sustainable Development at the SAPEA Group and was previously Director for International Business and Marketing Director within the same company. So we look forward to your remark. Jean-Marc, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to this very interesting webinar. I must first of all say that I agree with most comments and remarks and elements which have been brought on the table earlier. So forgive me if there is some repeats in my slides. I wish to show you that bio-based and biodegradable and compostable materials do offer a pragmatic and ready-to-use contribution to the world's plastic pollution problem. not a global solution at all, but a contribution to it. First of all, a few words about SAPEA Group. We are a medium-sized French family-owned group with around 600 million euros in turnover, 1,500 people. And over the years, we have become European leader in household packaging, which includes bags, any types of bags, waste collection bags, fruit and vegetables, freezer bags, and we are also in household wrappings. We are involved in resins as well. The environment has always been a very key element for us. We are investing over 5% of our turnover in R&D, and we are very careful to use the most adapted raw material to our products, depending on the use of the products and on the end of life of the product. That's why globally we are using a wide scope of raw materials, recycled polyethylene, which is representing over 50% of our total production, but also bio-based polyethylene, bio-based, biodegradable and compostable resins for some applications, which we are going to describe, and also paper products. So we can propose to our client really multiple options, multiple solutions. We are a member of European Bioplastic, the association which is representing the interest of the bioplastic industry in Europe. You see from these figures which are coming from the Nova Institute that it's a small but significant part of the plastic industry. The figures in a red circle are for the biodegradable part, and it's a growing industry with European-based leaders who have a very strong worldwide position. I will name a few of them, BASF, Total Corbion, Novamont, Biotech, and the other ones I hope will forgive me. But we are not at all claiming that bioplastic are the overall solution to plastic pollution, but we see in practice that they offer a key contribution in several applications. Some applications have been already described earlier. I would like to stress another one, which are the fruit and vegetable bags, which are an example where biodegradable bags, compostable bags, offer a solution to the challenge of plastic pollution. And first of all, we need to have a global picture of the challenges that we are facing. All of us, we need to promote qualitative and quantitative sorting of bio-waste by all inhabitants. I just remind you that the kitchen bio-waste represents 1/3 of the household waste globally. We have to achieve that, to get a good quality compost, we have to decrease the pollution of bio-waste by non-biodegradable items, including conventional plastics. And to make this bio-waste selective collection a success, we have to provide everyone with an easy tool to facilitate sorting and collection of bio-waste. There are different solutions for that. I will just refer to the technical recommendations published by ADEME, the French environmental official body, in 2019, which was stating that bio-based, biodegradable and compostable bags have a better global environmental performance than alternatives on the market in terms of life cycle and consumer behavior. And on all my slides, you will see at the bottom the web link to all the references I am giving. Of course, reusable bags are good options within SAPEA. We are also producing and distributing reusable bags. But I just want to stress the comment of Greenpeace in the UK, who stated the incredible number of reusable plastic bags distributed to the population. Are all of them reused? That's a good question. There are different scientific studies around this issue of biodegradability, compostability bags. They are most often very important. We still have to be careful reading them carefully. And I will refer here to a very interesting study published by the University of Plymouth a few years ago. Many of you, I guess, have heard about it, which was comparing over time the behavior of different bags in how they were evolving in a marine environment and in the sand. And reading carefully the study, you understood that the bags named biodegradable were in reality oxo-degradable bags, which were on the UK market and which had the print biodegradable on it. And the study was clearly mentioning that the real compostable bag matching the N13432 was getting the best results when the biodegradable bags were not evolving and remaining the same. So the problem is that many people all over Europe use this study showing that biodegradable bags, I mean bioplastic bags, do not work. It was not the case when you read the study carefully. So I would like to stress the study made by ADEM in 2020, which has been assessing the different specification standards around biodegradation of plastics in their given environments. And they were judging it, considering them as severe and pertinent. And they were mentioning that today, the evidence of plastic pollution comes exclusively from non-biodegradable plastics. Two comments about current EU regulation as SAPEA and UBP. We are quite happy about the ban on oxo-degradable plastics. Just a few words, this technology brings some additives into conventional plastics, and these additives cut the plastic conventional film into small pieces. The problem is that they remain exactly as long as regular plastic in the environment, which is not a solution. And another very interesting approach, the EU Waste Directive, pushing all the countries to separate and collect bio-waste by the end of 2023, which is tomorrow. The fruit and vegetables bags have proven to be an efficient way to help sorting and collection of bio-waste and to reduce the pollution of regular plastics in the compost. These bags have two lives. The first one is to help carry fruit and vegetable bags which are proposed in bulk in supermarkets, and they have a second life to contain the bio-waste. The Milan example is a very good example of the improvement that such bags, such system can bring to the bio-waste collection. Furthermore, the World Economic Forum has clearly stated and ranked bioplastics at the #1 of the 10 emerging technologies in 2019, and they highlighted their contribution to a circular economy. So as a conclusion, really bio-based, biodegradable and compostable materials are fully in line with the objective of circular bioeconomy and the Green Deal vision. In terms of ecological impact, going from soil to soil, and also in terms of economical objectives with a relocation of thousands of jobs in Europe. I will not describe all these advantages, which you can read at the bottom of the page, because I want to keep my last remaining minutes on the issue by taking the opportunity to propose 3 policy recommendations. The first one is to put in place an exchange of best practices between European towns and cities on sorting, collecting, and recycling of bio-waste, following the successful examples of Milan in Italy and some many French cities and Spanish ones as well. The second recommendation is about revision of 13432. We spoke about standards, and at the same member as well, I agree that standards must play an important role. The revision of 13432 should not only cover compostable plastics and compostable packaging, but also incorporate realistic guidance on effective composting timelines. We see the development of very short composting times in Europe, and really we are not sure at all that transforming bio-waste into something which is still a waste does help much. And the third recommendation would be to enable the emergence of current and future applications where biodegradability and compostability will provide significant environmental benefits, including maximum recovery and separate collection of bio-waste. We are a very innovative industry. We have already existing successful, efficient applications, but we are working on new ones. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nuni, for this interesting presentation. We now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is intervention from Ioana Popescu, who is Senior Program Manager in the Circular Economy team at the European Environmental Citizens Organization for Standardization. So the floor is yours, Ioana Popescu.
Can you see my screen?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
It's there.
Excellent. Thank you very much for having me. I might need to add that we recently changed our name and we are now called the Environmental Coalition on Standards.
Okay.
Thank you very much for having me this afternoon. I hope my presentation will not again repeat a lot of what has been said, because we do agree with many of the elements that have been provided so far as well. I would just like to bring the NGO perspective today on plastics biodegradability. Maybe just to start off, a few words about ECOS. So we are an environmental NGO that is international. We have around 52 members, but the membership is growing. We base our inputs and advocacy on the contracted technical experts. So what we provide in EU policy spheres is based on technical knowledge that we have received from our experts. But we also coordinate very closely with our members who are national NGOs from across the globe. This has been mentioned before, but it's really key to highlight the issue around biodegradability or plastics biodegradability often comes from the fact that there is a misunderstanding of the term, and people associate a variety of elements to it. When you ask the layman, they will say, this sounds good, this sounds sustainable, maybe is it organic, maybe is it bio-based, it's certainly natural. So there's a lot of confusion around this. There is, some of them might remember, I think that in high school I learned that natural material and organic material is biodegradable, so maybe this is organic material. Others that maybe know a bit more will make the differentiation between, okay, I know that biodegradability might be compostability, home compostability, maybe it's related to industrial composting, or maybe even fermentation and aerobic digestion. So there are different levels of understanding, and most of the confusion relates to the fact that we are mixing two concepts. The first one is biodegradability as a characteristic or functionality that you have with regards to a material or a product. So far in the technical sphere, we have been differentiating between what we call end-of-life options that are controlled and uncontrolled. And so the controlled end-of-life options in standardization today and in most of the technical sphere will consider that industrial composting is managed end-of-life options, whereas biodegradation in situ is unmanaged. And so this differentiation is important to make when we are speaking about biodegradability, because often in policy documents or in the media, there is a confusion related around, okay, are we speaking about biodegradation in controlled conditions or in uncontrolled conditions? So this is just a highlight of how the categorization has been made so far, and which we also endorse. But then comes the added layer of complication, which is that biodegradability is sometimes put as a claim on a product. So sometimes you can read on a wet wipe or I don't know, whatever, on a bottle. I've seen on textiles and in a variety of instances. Biodegradability is a word that we put, or that is put on specific products. But in that sense, we are creating confusion with the consumer, because the consumer might make the associations that I have mentioned before with regards to, oh, I've learned in school that I can throw this into the environment. The consumer is not equipped necessarily to make an informed choice as to what to do with a product that is marked as biodegradable. And the claim in itself is relatively vague. It is not specific enough to actually guide the consumer towards making the right choice. So therefore, we as environmental NGOs, also based on studies that have been published mostly in the US, there is evidence that consumers tend to litter more products that are marked biodegradable. So we are extremely skeptical about having the word biodegradable or compostable on consumer products. This was mentioned before, and I don't want to go into a lot of explanations about standards, but it is necessary to know that there are many standards out there. This is screenshots of me putting biodegradability of plastics in various standards bodies search engines, and at ISO I found 58. At CEN, well, it's not mentioned, but I think there were around 40. For an American standards body called ASTM, I found another 45. And then obviously there are also the standards that are most visible or that people might be most familiar with, which are the labels that are associated to standard criteria, such as the ones from Vinsotto or DIN geprüft. So this is to highlight that there are quite a number of standards, and it's very difficult to understand when we're speaking about standard specifications or test methods, which one are we speaking about, which one are we referring to, are we sure that they are fit for purpose? So the diversity in scope and ambition levels of all of these standards is very, very big. And we need to be very careful in considering them with their positive elements, but also their shortcomings. What is also important to know, and this is an element which has not been brought so far, but standards are voluntary in application, even when they are cited in EU legislation. So the principle is that whatever manufacturer wants to use a standard can use it if they want to. If this standard is mentioned in EU legislation, then the standard provides presumption of conformity with the legislation, but the manufacturer can still use his own standard. So there is no necessity of demonstrating that a certain standard, even referenced in legislation, is being followed. So this is the only time where this is necessary to be done is if there is a market surveillance authority coming to you and asking, okay, please demonstrate that the standard that you are using is either the European recognized one or a better one. So this is an important element to stress, and this should be included into the considerations. And then from our perspective and our experience, all of the standards that you see here still have shortcomings. The difficulty coming from the fact that it's difficult to represent real life conditions in a standard. To a certain extent, the standards that we know and that are the most popular are standard specifications, but they refer to tests. So to biodegradation tests, and both need to work hand in hand for the substance and the result to actually make sense. And so, for example, if you want to introduce more representativity of real life conditions, you might need to change first the test method and then also the standard specification. So there is quite a lot of maintenance involved in trying to change these elements. There's also an element of feasibility. I mean, some of the shortcomings that I'm going to be listing here come from the usability of the standard. For example, it's necessary to reach a certain level of temperature for the microorganisms to start the biodegradation process. This is necessary because of operational elements, but this is not necessarily a condition which is met in the environment. So there is quite a lot of attention to be brought to making sure that the standards that we agree on and that will ultimately be used for shaping how we treat biodegradable plastics, that they actually make sense with regard to real life use. Also, again, an operational element that is in standards, but still, it is in most of them, it is allowed to mill and flake the product before testing it, meaning that is much smaller when it ends in when it is being tested in, for example, marine conditions. Another element is related to the fact that there are choices possible. So often in standards, you would have one route or a second route, and you can choose whichever is most practical for you as a manufacturer. But again, this is not necessarily what you will see as a product in the market, and therefore this might not represent entirely the behavior of such a product in the environment because of due to the use of that standard. So this is to highlight that they do have shortcomings, and these need to be overcome to make a most informed and scientific decision about biodegradable plastics. So I guess that the message, it has been said before, but still the need for a clear and mandatory regulatory environment is necessary to ensure that we are not misusing such plastics. It has been shown that biodegradability is not a solution to littering. This has been mentioned in the plastic strategy already, and I believe even in the first Circular Economy Action Plan. In accordance with circular economy principles, biodegradability ranks relatively low, so it doesn't really contribute to value retention as other options of management for plastics would have. And from our perspective, it is not a functionality we should rely on to solve waste management issues. I think Ola is raising his hand.
Yeah, your time is basically up, so please conclude.
Yes, so this is my last slide, so that's that's fine then. The idea being that if we want to rely on this as a functionality for waste management issues, we will be shooting ourselves in the foot. So indeed, it has been mentioned before. What we need to consider is very niche applications. What we need to make sure is that we have solid, stringent, and EU-recognized terminology, test methods, and standard specifications that we refer to, and we only stick to those, and we do not create confusion by referring to a wide variety of standards. And I might also like to highlight that there is skepticism from civil society and the industry about biodegradation in the open environment, because you cannot be sure that a certain biodegradation component will not in the end end up in fresh water instead of soil because of the high mobility rate of plastics, especially when they are being shortened and when they enter the microplastic stage. And from our perspective, the biodegradability of plastic should definitely not be used as a product claim on consumer products, because if we want to make best use of the functionality, then this is a business-to-business discussion. It is not something that the consumer needs to have an impact on. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm available for questions, obviously.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Joanna, for this lively presentation. We move on quickly to the last item before the Q&A, which is the interventions by two of our members of the European Parliament. We have Delara Burkhardt with us, who is a member of the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament. And we have Stéphane Bijou, who is a member of the Renew Europe group in the European Parliament. So the floor is now up to our two distinguished members of the European Parliament. Maybe Delara Burkhardt first, and then Stéphane Bijou.
Okay, thank you very much for all the interesting contributions and inputs. I really take a lot with me and listen carefully, and I won't make comments on everything, but I will definitely take it to the parliamentary work, and maybe we can also continue exchanging on that. So, I mean, the question of urgency came very, very clear. Plastics are basically everywhere, even when I look around in my apartment, in the fridge, in the textiles, everywhere. The problem is that plastics are not just everywhere, they also stay everywhere, even though it disappears for our eyes. But the problem and consequences really stay and keep growing, and we need to end this behavior. This is crucial. Ole Petersen in the beginning said 400 million tons of plastics are produced worldwide every year. Most of it come from in this times, crude oil-based raw materials. And in Germany alone, I'm from Germany, so this, excuse my example, everyone consumes about 220 kilograms of packaging waste per capita per year. So we know that the pandemic even had a worsening effect here too, and has caused that use of single-use plastics had been booming. So I really think the time that up to July, the single-use plastic directive will come mandatory. This is a very timely question, and it really also, the urgency is growing. Also, putting up the glasses of a consumer, we see already that a lot of brands are using labels describing the product or packaging as compostable or biodegradable. And of course, the consumer might think about buying the better product for the environment. But as we know, and as you all described, we know it is not that easy, and also often quite misleading. When I buy a product which has a compostable packaging, I still can't throw it away wherever I want to, but the branding around this topic is leading to this thought. And also, if you talk to your local municipal disposal waste management, and when they find so-called biodegradable plastic bags land in the organic waste, this puts recycling processes into a difficult situation. So I really support what has been said on the question of clear definitions of biodegradability, on which we base all innovation developments and new business models, is very crucial. But I also share the doubts on the product claims that has been put up by Iona. So we shouldn't create the impression that biodegradable plastic is a rebranding of normal plastic. And the answer to a ban of single-use plastic shouldn't be an implementation of single-use biodegradable plastics. I think, first of all, our main goal, and this also has been mentioned, especially from Nicole and Michael, our main goal to tackle the problem with plastic should be reduction of packaging, more reuse and recycling. Biodegradable plastics are so far not a solution to littering. The multiple use of plastic through recycling offers significantly more ecological benefits. In contrast, only valuable materials lost through the biological degradation of bioplastics. Single-use products remain short-lived, and unlike reusable products, generate unnecessary waste, regardless of whether they are biodegradable or not. And if biodegradable disposable items end up in the environment, this has a similar consequence to the input of the conventional plastics, as the items can only be degraded under certain conditions, and thus only degrade very slowly on the fields or in the oceans. the role of testing and certification. This has also been mentioned. Classification, example given the timeframes, like Miriam Weber was mentioning it. We need a clear regulatory framework here, I think, and we also have to discuss further on, and this is also something that I take with me from today, which fields of applications might be interesting for the question of biodegradability. For example, on shoe soles, maybe also tiles. So I really would like to further dive in that. Where are the fields of application? Where should we also focus our eyes on? So thanks again for all the interesting input, and I would be happy to continue the exchange on this. So I think this was a first overview of the field, and there's a lot of work to do. This became clear, and feel free to contact me also and further exchange on this.
Thank you very much, and many thanks for your support for what is really a very important issue. And let's hear now from Stéphane Bichou. The floor is yours.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, and thank you, ABCD, for this webinar. I would like to share that since the beginning of our meeting, there is a question in my mind. To ask ourselves about plastics is, first of all, to agree to ask ourselves if we want to continue as it is, or if we want to take action. All of you have answered, of course, we have to go on to move forward, because if we stay passive, we will continue to feel sick as we watch tons of plastics particles piled into the ocean by a boat on fire alongside the shores of Sri Lanka in the Indian Ocean. The Indian Ocean is my ocean, because yes, I live by the ocean, like many Europeans in overseas territories. This accident in Sri Lanka happened a few days ago, but the real ecological disaster due to the plastic pollution will last for several years. If we take action, it means that we refused to live with a countdown before the next disaster comes, because plastic pollution is an ecological disaster. We must collect, and you have said, we must collect our old waste, stop polluting, and at the same time, work urgently to make new plastics biodegradable. This is a challenge for the European Green Deal, but it's also a challenge and a goal for the Blue Deal we have to build together. Many say it will take time, but in reality, we don't have time. When we poison nature, we also poison our plates. What we throw into the earth or into the sea, finally, it ends up in our bellies. So, are biodegradable plastics a solution? Yes, if we decide not only to talk about them, but also to improve them and to finance them. And we will also have to find the solutions to impose them. The time has come to build and share ecological solutions, innovative and courageous solutions that give meaning to our common challenge. I know I often use the word solution, but you know, for me, what we are trying to do together is a fight for the respect of our planet and a fight for the respect of life. And to be able to win such a fight, we have to be realistic, of course, but we have to be optimistic too. Thank you. And of course, you can count on me.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Bichou, for this important intervention. We again really appreciate your support for this very important cause indeed, and it's a great privilege for us to have had both you and your colleague here with us today, because at the end of the day, the European Parliament plays, of course, a colossally important role in planning and securing our future. Well, it's my privilege to have chaired this session, and I just want to take this opportunity on behalf of SAPEA to thank all our speakers for their very important contributions. We really enjoyed all the interventions, which I think were of very great value, and we are actually on time, so I'm very pleased with that. And this ends my duty at this webinar, and it's my pleasure now to hand over to Ilias Grampas, who will manage the Q&A session. So Ilias, it's your turn now.
Thank you very much, Ole. Thank you very much to begin with to our honorable MEPs, honorable members of the European Parliament, but of course, dear speakers and our audience for today. It seems that we have found a big consensus with regards to the fact that plastic pollution is a worldwide issue of increasing concern. Mr. Lara Burkhardt was also underlining the timely nature of today's discussion, but also Mr. Bijou highlighting the impacts with regards to the environment, human and animal health. So as biodegradable plastics present some solutions, we've heard that they present, they are a solution, but not the solution. There are also certain challenges ahead tied with that. So I'm very happy that we had the opportunity to discuss about SAPEA scientific evidence, but also explore some key policy recommendations and actions put forward by our excellent speakers of today. So judging by the number, the amount of the questions received, I think that everyone is very much looking forward to that part of the event today. So without further ado, I'll just try to cluster some questions we received. And perhaps to begin with, we do have some intro questions setting the scene. Of course, during today's event, we've heard a lot about the need for further clarity, the need to avoid misconceptions, and to provide information to consumers. So the first question, I think, would be perhaps answered best by Dr. Grobert or colleagues from SAPEA. And it reads out, with regards to their production, are biodegradable plastics actually a new plastic variant or a new material that mimics plastics?
Michael, is that something for you to answer?
Could you please repeat the question? Just
yes,
for me to
the question is, yes. The question is, with regards to their production, are biodegradable plastics a new plastic variant or a new material that mimics plastic?
I would say they are plastics. On that level, I don't see the need to differentiate. They have the additional function or property of being able to biodegrade in specific environments. But I would refer to them as being plastic materials when the polymer is being used in a plastic.
Yeah, I would agree to that. Plastic
and then,
is a plastic, whether it biodegrades or it doesn't.
And then the second question that we have received is, I think, for Ole, Professor Ole Petersen. And that's actually with reference, Ole, to your slides and your remarks in the beginning of the event. And the question is, let me quickly find that. The question is with regards to your slides. So is also the consumption of plastics in the EU as flat as the production line, like in the graph you showed us?
Well, I think really it's a question for the experts to answer that rather than from me. I use the slide because I think it is an important one from our evidence review report. But I think Miriam or Michael are much better suited to answering that question than I am. I'm not a plastics expert.
So I would refer to Mr. Nuni in this case. I think he knows much better.
Can you remind me of the question, please, to be sure that I answer it precisely?
Yes. The question is with regards to the consumption of plastics. If it is as flat as the production line portrayed in the slides, in the introduction slides of Mr. Petersen.
I think that this very interesting slide was referring to the production by continent. That we have to keep in mind that Europe is importing more and more consumer goods from Asia, from other continents. And therefore, all the packaging we receive in Europe and we use in Europe, and the packaging which ends up in our recycling stream, or which should end up in our recycling streams and in our waste management system, are more and more coming from Asia. So that's, in my mind, that's one explanation of these two different curves.
Yeah, it is indeed production that is on the slide. And as I also mentioned, major cause of the increase is coming from China. So it's a good point that we may not produce more in Europe year by year, but we are importing more.
Thank you very much for the clarification. I hope it serves to also answer the question from the audience. Now turning to Mr. Sadauskas from the European Commission. We have a couple of questions received. The first one is very much linked with the market-based measures Mr. Sadauskas mentioned in your presentation being considered by the European Commission. So the first question would be if you can kindly further elaborate on this point, on the further measures, market-based measures considered. And the second one, once again for Mr. Sadauskas, would be if the European Commission is willing to consider labeling that states whether a product biodegrades at sea.
Yes, thank you for the questions as well as for the discussion. As for market-based measures, I don't want to speculate too much on that because this will come with ideas that should be elaborated in the framework for bio-based and biodegradable plastics, which is due next year. If I did it now, I think it would be jumping ahead of the train. But one thing I can say is that since we're also revising some other pieces of legislation, like the packaging directive, we might need to look into the principles of the extended producer responsibility and the fees in it, and to see if you need to assign the fee rates to certain properties, including biodegradability. It's still early to say. We haven't done an impact assessment on that, so therefore I cannot do this. But for me, EPR schemes is one of those possibilities. A bit like what we have also for the amendment, the last amendment to the penultimate amendment to the packaging directive, which is famously known as plastic bags directive, where there was a requirement to the member states in order to reduce the single-use plastic bags to have alternative measures, including among those putting a price on it. So, in whichever way you do it, it's fine as long as you differentiate between the price signal as well as and link it to the properties. But the most important thing here is not the market-based measures, is really what properties we are trying to promote and which properties we're trying to demote, so to say. And that's precisely what this discussion is about. As for the labeling in the marine environment, well, once again, I would not necessarily go into this because imagine a product. It could be any product that says, okay, it's biodegrading in marine environment, and the other one is biodegrades on soil, the other one biodegrades in rivers and fresh waters. And I think the pictures that were shown here of Singapore and Toronto are really good because one thing might biodegrade in Singapore, but might not necessarily biodegrade in Toronto. One thing might biodegrade in Palermo, but not necessarily in Helsinki. For different reasons of temperatures. So we need to be very careful about this because it may confuse the consumers. At the same time, I would not rule out labeling because labeling needs to be very clear. But that's precisely why I was saying about the limits, cognitive limits of a consumer who don't have time to read everything, to go into everything, and when it becomes too complicated, people just tend to ignore this. So it's got to be really simple, very straightforward, and really underpinned by good behavioral analysis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sadauskas. And perhaps stepping on that, I see that we have received a follow-up question regarding the intervention of Ms. Popescu. I think it's specifically targeting the policy recommendations mentioned at the second part of your presentation, Ms. Popescu. And it reads, do you have any suggestions to address the problem about the misunderstanding of biodegradable labels on plastic packaging?
Yeah, thanks for the question. This is a very timely question, actually. So first of all, I would just like to highlight again that we do not think that it's necessary for plastic products to be labeled as biodegradable when those are plastic products that are destined for the consumer. That being said, there is the UN has developed guidelines for the reliability of product claims. These are, I think it's called credible green claims or something like that. And it has credible green claims tend to have at least 3 elements. They need to be relevant. So the stated characteristic needs to have some kind of added value as regards the status quo. So for example, in the case of a product that it often ends up in bio-waste, if it is mentioned that it's compostable, then it's relevant because it helps towards a certain goal. If it is just a claim that is there to sell more products, it is not relevant in UN speaking terms. There is the element of the credibility. So the credibility is based on what the standard used was and the elements that are covered in the standard. And obviously from our perspective, as ambitious the credibility or as ambitious the standard, as better the credibility will be. And then there is also the element of the how clear the label is. So for example, it needs to be extremely explicit in what is expected, or if this is an instruction to the consumer. So it needs to be extremely unbiased and clear in how it is to be handled or disposed of. Yeah, I think these 3 elements would already be a step forward.
Thank you very much, Ms. Popescu, for your reply. Moving on, perhaps we have a question for Dr. Sander. Well, to begin with, I think that we've heard within your intervention, and it's been a very informative speech with regards to the certain conditions and criteria, which, when met, allow for the positive effects of biodegradable plastics to be further activated. But the question is, why do you think that those products don't degrade quickly enough? Why is that? And if there is any different kinds of which most are not efficient in biodegradation?
I don't think we can identify one factor that plays the key role. It really depends on the environment in which the plastic resides and ends up, whether or not it will biodegrade and at which rate it will biodegrade. There are different factors. It's a multifactorial process, really. It's hard to, as I said, there's not one key parameter. It's temperature, it's water content, it's microbial activity, it is microbial community composition. Even within the microbes, fungi and bacteria play different roles. It's nutrient availability. So you can imagine that a lot of things have to come together for this to work. And this is also the reason why we see such strong variations between the environments. It is part of the truth is in the plastic, whether or not it can biodegrade, but a lot of the truth is in the environment where it ends up. And so one should not underestimate the importance of the environment when it comes to assessing whether and at what rate these materials biodegrade.
And perhaps, yes, Mr. Nuni, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. I fully agree, but I would just like to remind that bioplastics, compostable biodegradable plastics, are built to make the job of the finished product, first of all. And so there is a trade-off, a difficult one, a challenge, between a material which will be processed in a finished product, whether it be a packaging or a product, which will make the job it is designed for, otherwise it has no reason to exist, and then afterwards to have this biodegradability property. And for instance, you have applications where you can work with hydrosoluble products but you have many applications for which if your film, your product is hydrosoluble, it will not make at all the job it is designed initially for. That's the difficulty.
Yes, please, Ms. Grobert.
So technical solutions are probably fairly straightforward, considering for plastics to behave in certain environments in a certain way to biodegrade, that's fine. We talked about labeling, informing end users or also manufacturers, providing them with information on how to apply the plastics, where to apply it, and under what conditions for it to biodegrade. That's all considering everything that's very straightforward. The one point we haven't really addressed is, or addressed enough, is the human behavior. Not just informing people, dumping them with information, but also raising the awareness for them to take charge, to make sure that they do use it appropriately, and they can only do that if they have the right information available how to do it. So I think the raising awareness, information campaigns is something that also needs to be tackled more, because the technical solution is probably there, but how we apply it in society and the environment is also a bottleneck that we probably need to look a bit more closely, the human factor.
I saw that Dr. Weber would also like to take the floor. Otherwise, I also have a follow-up question, Ms. Grobert, with regards to your point.
Thank you. I'd like to mention also the way how to continuously working on an evaluation system and testing scheme to feed an evaluation system for applications which are used in the environment and where recovery is not possible anymore. I would like to highlight that we as scientists together with industry are working hard on such a testing scheme and evaluation scheme, and I think we're making good progress. It seems like, whoa, it's almost impossible, environment is so complex, but I would like to highlight here it is possible, and we are working on, we're making good progress on that. I'm happy to share whoever would like to know more about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And perhaps stepping on the point of Ms. Grobert, we have received a question from the audience, and I'm going to read it out for you. And this is concerning the SAPEA report. So the SAPEA report raises the risk of a rebound effect, whereby the public litters more if they think that plastics will biodegrade. What are your views on that? Perhaps specifically we can have Mr. Nuni's views, for example, with regards to food packaging.
For sure, all the technical progress we are making, all the innovations, should not push people to throw packagings or products in nature. So the industry highly recommends to go on with mentions: do not throw in nature, do not litter, and even for products which are biodegradable. This biodegradability in a specific environment is a plus, which is here to, which can be here to bring a solution where there was a mismatch and a mistake in the waste treatment. But it must be hidden to the public. For the public, we must always go on speaking about compostability and guide people on the waste stream they must use to get rid of the product or the packaging.
Are there any further views on that, perhaps? Yes, Ms. Popescu.
Yes, I think that with regards to the efforts being done to minimize potential leakage or mishappenings with regards to waste treatment, I think that we should also be aware that some elements that we are suggesting today are based on the status quo. So I might question, why do we have food stickers when, for example, at least here in Belgium, the organic sweet potatoes or whatever have marking that is pushed into the product. So is the food sticker even still relevant to be used. So let's not use the fact that biodegradability or compostability could provide some element of solution to the status quo, which we might be questioning within the next year as part of the fact that we are trying to reduce overall amounts of material that we put in circulation. And this also includes very small applications like, for example, fruit stickers.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think it is maybe also worth just reiterating what Michael Sander said very forcefully, that biodegradable products are not the solution to littering. I mean, this was, I think, a very important statement, and it is worth repeating.
Also, we've heard in the beginning of the event about some specific recommendations from SAPEA, underlining the need to adopt a definition on biodegradability of plastics, but also follow the waste hierarchy, specifically the 3 R's of sustainability, invest in testing and certification, labeling and information. So we have a question, I think, which is linked with this point. Sustainability is not just a matter of what happens to a product in the open environment, but it also requires an evaluation of the impacts all along the life cycle. How can we best ensure that this is met? Perhaps we can open the question to all speakers. Anyone willing to take the floor?
For me, it's an issue at the beginning when you design a plastic product. It's not the end of life what we are talking about in this case. So I would say it's out of scope here. And it's more a question to the commissioner how to address this.
Mr. Sadauskas, yes.
Yes, I can answer. Indeed, this is it's not pertaining to the plastics as such. Every product has to be sustainable, whether it's plastics, wood, metal, doesn't matter which one. But I fully agree, it's got to be the life cycle tested. Because if you only look at the end of the life cycle and you don't know really what happens before that, you may miss major environmental impacts. So it's only when you analyze all the life of a product, then you know really what's the best of it. And that's precisely what we're trying to do with the Sustainable Product Initiative, which has been announced in the Green Deal and also in the Circular Economy Action Plan, and which is due hopefully by the end of this year, together with many other initiatives, be it the packaging directive, cars legislation, the batteries that have come out last year already. So it's a wider question, which has probably little to do with the biodegradability in open environment here. But yes, I can confirm that life cycle approach is absolute must, and it applies to every single product.
And then perhaps we have a little bit of time for a final question, and that reads, if biodegradability is a system property, then does it mean something is only biodegradable if the end user is able and willing to put it in the right waste stream? And then do we have evidence about the extent to which consumers are A, informed, and B, motivated to do that? Yes.
Maybe I could give it one answer, but not the answer probably. And that is, I would appreciate if the consumers are part of this story, but they're not the sole story. And the issue with the consumer is, of course, that we're typically speak about waste management and whether a product after its use is put in the right place. But the SAPEA working group, we worked on also applications, mainly on applications actually, almost exclusively, where plastics are deliberately released into the open environment or used in the open environment. And that is a slightly different question then. It's less about the consumer and what you do with your Coke bottle after you drink the Coke or whatever you drink. it is about the appropriate use in specific applications of plastics where you deliberately put them out, or where you have a high probability of the material ending by its use in the open environment. And I think there's a slight disconnect in the sense that, of course, we think about our own personal use of plastic, and it's an important, very important question. So I wouldn't disagree that we need to ensure that it ends up in the right waste stream. But the applications we mainly discussed were not actually not that consumer oriented.
It's intentional use of biodegradable plastics in the open environment. That was the scoping question. That was the focus of the study. And I mean, the coffee cup example keeps cropping up because everybody can relate to it. Whereas mulch films are a little bit more remote, probably to most of us, and dolly ropes are even further, especially for those people who are not living near the sea. So it's the scoping question was very well defined around intentional use of biodegradable plastics in the open environment. And that's what SAPEA looked at, found the scientific evidence, and on which we based our recommendations.
Yes, Dr. Weber.
I mean, it is the case that the theme of this in a way is broader than both the evidence review report and the scientific opinion, and there's nothing wrong, of course, with casting it more broadly.
No, we don't
so
have
it is an important
evidence.
question. But as you say, what we were asked to do was to focus very specifically on this one point. But obviously, the title of today's webinar is quite a bit broader.
No, I agree, but we don't have the experimental evidence or the scientific support to give answers that we haven't researched. That's why I made that point.
That's right.
From a scientific point of view, I'm very curious how society is now moving on, since we're clearly from the SAPEA report or the Biosyn project defined applications, not everyone is aware of. Yeah, so I think we should now focus on these because the input as we are speaking is ongoing. Yeah, and substantially ongoing, and not only the packaging, the other parts are much more important, much more amount is fueling into the environment. We cannot recover anymore. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Weber. Thank you very much to all of the speakers, also to participating MEPs. To begin with, hosting MEP, Mr. Chahim, but also to our audience. Thank you very much for being part, to all of our speakers, for this Q&A discussion, for your contributions and insights, and replying to the questions received by the audience. All in all, I'm afraid that as we have reached the end of today's event, I'd like to provide the floor to hosting MEP, Mr. Chahim. I'm aware that his agenda would not allow for him to participate, but I know that Bauke Brouwer, his assistant, is connected and here with us to deliver the closing remarks of the event. So I would like to once again thank all of the speakers, thank our audience for joining us today. On behalf of the European Parliament Intergroup Secretariat, I would also like to thank SAPEA for co-organizing this event, and very much looking forward to continuing this discussion in the future ahead. So Bauke, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Elias, and thank all the speakers and experts. I think we've heard some very interesting points about biodegradable plastics and plastic pollution in general. I think the main conclusion is that although biodegradable plastics can be part of the solution, we should still prioritize the reuse, reduce, and recycling of plastics. And the biodegradable plastics can play a role, but it would be for very specific applications where also predictable where the plastics will end up eventually. And I think that's basically the main conclusion I got from this webinar. And on the labeling, I think I agree with Mr. Saudaskas that we need a behavioral analysis for labeling for consumers to see what the effects will be. That's all I had. Thanks everyone. Thanks Elias, and thank you all the experts for being here. On behalf of Mohammed, Chahim, of course.
Thank you very much, and wishing you a nice afternoon. Once again, thanks to all speakers and thanks to our dear audience for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.